Vice Minister Lopez, if I can perhaps begin with you. So, what are your big challenges in El Salvador in terms of developing your manufacturing sector, and what are your priorities over the next couple of years?
Bueno, buenas tardes. Quisiera primero agradecer a los Emiratos Árabes Unidos por habernos invitado a este excelente reunión, porque hemos aprendido muchísimo acerca de cómo enfrentar mejor nuestros procesos y nuestros retos, Simon. En realidad, para un país como El Salvador, y quisiera contextualizar muy brevemente a la audiencia, es el país más pequeño de Latinoamérica, tiene apenas 21.000 kilómetros cuadrados, 9.3 millones de habitantes, tenemos una densidad poblacional muy alta y tenemos un 25% de la industria que aporta al PIB. Somos un país muy joven, el 35% de nuestra población es menor de 17 años y la mitad de nuestra población menor de 30 años, por lo tanto, eso pone algunos otros elementos en estos retos que tenemos que enfrentar como país. En realidad, para nosotros, nuestro principal reto es cómo revertir una tendencia de décadas de bajo crecimiento. Nuestro país desde hace 3 décadas ha venido creciendo a tasas menores a 2%. Por lo tanto, para nosotros desarrollar un proceso de transformación productiva, de reindustrialización, es muy importante. Y en esa medida, lo primero que hemos hecho es definir una visión a dónde queremos estar en el año 2030. Creemos nosotros que lo más importante para poder enfrentar un reto es saber a dónde quiero llegar. Y en esa definición de país creo que es importante encontrar a los aliados adecuados, a los aliados estratégicos. En nuestro caso, por supuesto, hemos trabajado de la mano con nuestro sector industrial, con nuestro sector productivo. Ayer estuve en una conferencia donde estaba el ministro de Salud de los Emiratos y estaba realmente sorprendida, cómo siendo un ministro de Salud habla y entiende perfectamente a su industria, a la industria farmacéutica como un elemento fundamental para resolver sus problemas. Entonces creo que eso es muy importante. Para nosotros tener esta visión nos ha llevado a trabajar de la mano con nuestro sector industrial, como gobierno, pero también con el sector académico, con las universidades, con la educación y por supuesto trabajar una consulta con nuestra población para definir esta visión. Creo que es importante definir cuáles son los sectores a los que le vamos a apostar y en nuestro caso hemos definido y por supuesto establecer un buen sistema de monitoreo. Creemos nosotros que como país, si tenemos esto, somos capaces de enfrentar el gran reto de generar un bienestar mayor a nuestra población a partir de un mayor crecimiento y de una reindustrialización de nuestra economía.
Okay. So, Vice Minister, you spoke about some of the different sectors that El Salvador is focusing on. Oh. Is the translation okay?
No.
Okay.
You
Okay,
continue.
all right. So, apologies. Now we can hear each other. What I'd like to ask you about countries. So, which markets, external markets, are looking like they're going to be more important for El Salvador? So, a very small country, you need the external sector. Is the US now moving away as an important market? Where else are you going to look?
En realidad nosotros tenemos la ventaja de tener tratados comerciales con dos de los mercados más grandes del mundo, que es el de los Estados Unidos y el de Europa. Creo que a partir de los sucesos que hemos todos estado analizando que suceden hoy en día en los Estados Unidos, por supuesto que tiene que llevarnos a una redefinición de nuestra estrategia, pero ciertamente es un mercado que sigue siendo importante para nosotros. Hoy hemos tenido, por ejemplo, acercamientos con el gobierno de los Emiratos Árabes y nos parece que es una zona donde nosotros también tenemos que volver a ver, porque tradicionalmente nuestro sector industrial ha visto hacia los Estados Unidos, pero tenemos grandes ventajas con Europa. tener acuerdos que nos den trato preferencial con estos mercados sigue siendo una enorme oportunidad. Y para nosotros diversificar los mercados, así como diversificar nuestra oferta exportable, es muy importante. Somos un país que tradicionalmente ha sido agrícola, del sector primario, pero también tenemos una industria pujante que en el caso nuestro es el sector de textil y confección. La mitad de nuestras exportaciones proviene de este sector, el sector plásticos, el sector farmacéuticos. Quiero comentarles, Simon, solo en el sector farmacéutico tenemos una clasificación grado 3 de la OMS en Centroamérica, lo cual realmente nos pone a la vanguardia en este sector. Pero también estamos viendo, y ahí hago referencia a que somos una población joven, a otras industrias, las industrias creativas. Estamos hoy por hoy accediendo a estos mercados en la industria de videojuegos, de animaciones digitales, como una industria, la economía naranja, que hoy en día genera enormes oportunidades para los jóvenes. Y además también estamos trabajando el sector de aeronáutica. Yo comentaba hoy con el viceministro de Economía de los Emiratos que desde hace 4 años, Qatar Airways, por ejemplo, recluta pilotos y tripulación en nuestro país para esta aerolínea. Eso significa que hay oportunidades también acá y que nosotros pues estamos queriendo aprovecharlas.
Okay, well, I think we maybe can come back in the discussion to the investment opportunities between the Middle East region and Latin America and El Salvador, perhaps in particular. Maybe if we can move on to Humberto Lopez from the World Bank. So I know you have a very wide perspective across the region. Where do you think the strengths and weaknesses of manufacturing in Latin America are, either in terms of sectors or locations?
Thank you, Simon, for having us here. Listen, as you were mentioning before, I don't think there is a doubt that manufacturing has been declining in Latin America over the past 20 years. You look where we were in the 90s, and manufacturing used to represent more or less 25 to 30% of GDP in most of the countries on average. Today it's about 15%, so it's half. And if you look at the evolution of the labor force that has been working in these sectors, something happened very similar. Now it's half of what you used to have 20 years ago. And I guess that the question is trying, first of all, to understand why these trends are there. And what I would like to put on the table 3 things and see whether we can then open for discussion. The first thing is related to the structure of Latin America, to the structure of the different economies. The second thing is on the ability to Latin American companies in general to innovate. And the third thing is on micromanagement, on macro policy. And so very quickly, you look at the evolution of the manufacturing trends, and it's difficult not to realize that in some sense it coincides with the trade liberalization of the 90s. Latin America liberalized many things, but even trade in the 90s, and what you start observing is that manufacturing decline. And for many people this can be shocking, but I think that what it reflects is that the comparative advantage of the region at a certain point was not there, was in the primary sector, in commodities. And indeed, the growth of Latin America in the first decade of the 21st century has been driven by commodities. It was not manufacturing. So what's going on there? Having a comparative advantage in commodities, that's probably related to geography, where you are in the world. But not having a comparative advantage in manufacturing probably related to policies or lack of policies implemented in previous years. And here what I would like is to throw 2 things on the table. One of them is logistics. You look at logistics costs in Latin America, and on average, they tend to be between 15 and 30% of the final value of the product. In some small countries of Central America, it reached 40%. In the OECD, these costs are 8%. Many times we start discussing about taxes, 2% here, 3% there, when you start having this difference in logistics costs that de facto this is a tax for the companies. So this is the first element to put forward. And this is, in many cases, is related to lack of infrastructure. I like to quote, since we have the Vice Minister of El Salvador here, a truck moving in Central America does it at an average speed of 11 kilometers per hour. Okay, Usain Bolt running 100 meters in the Olympic Games goes faster than that, just to give you an idea of what we are talking. So at these speeds, it's very difficult to be competitive. And the second element is related to education. You were mentioning before that the education levels in Latin America are okay. They are okay in primary education, but what it matters for the skills is secondary education. The share of the population 25 to 30-year-old that have completed secondary education in Latin America is around 50%. This compares to 80% in the OECD and close to 100% in the United States. So we are quite behind in those areas. No? And this morning we were having here a discussion also, and we were listening to one of the panelists mentioning that the importance of skills, the importance of human capital to have manufacturing. No? So this is one area where we are behind in many areas, and I think that the fact that we are behind in many areas, infrastructure and education mainly, probably related to the lack of having a comparative advantage in manufacturing. A second part is more the micro dimension. Latin American companies innovate much less than companies elsewhere. And you can look at innovation the way you want, whether it's patents, whether it's introduction of new products, whether it's changes to existing products. It doesn't matter. Innovation is very low in Latin America. And in part, that can be because research and development in the private sector in Latin America is extremely low. Investment tends to be low in Latin America, and investment in R&D is also very low. But I think that there are also elements related to barriers to entry to new companies, the ability of new companies to compete. This is very difficult, and in part also in small countries, because the fixed cost of having more than one company tends to be very difficult. So there are a number of market imperfections in the small economies. There are a number of barriers in the big economies that are also critical. And the third element on the macro aspects is the exchange rate. During the first decade between 2000 and 2010, what we observed is a real exchange rate appreciation in most of the countries of the region. And I think that this is a standard Dutch disease textbook example. You are exporting commodities, you are doing very well, you have capital inflows, your exchange rate goes up, all the other sectors start suffering, particularly in tradables. And when we are talking about manufacturing, particularly in small economies that need to export, that need the big market, these have been suffering. Take into account also that you don't have a symmetric effect when there is a devaluation, because once you lose a market, once you exit, you start having problems there. So again, I think that is not just one thing that explains where we are. It's a combination of structure, lack of investment in many areas by policymakers, lack of innovation by our companies, and this is related to many things, but including lack of competition in many of the markets. And finally, I think that macro policy has been driven by developments in the primary sector rather than taking into account what are the implications for the secondary sector.
I mean, thinking about innovation, what sort of innovation is important for Latin American companies? Do you think it's about coming up with new techniques, or is it about adapting existing techniques to the local context?
It depends. It's going to depend on the country, because when we're talking about Latin America, the temptation sometimes is to put everybody in a basket, but think that you have countries in Central America like Nicaragua with per capita income of $1,100, and then you have countries in the south that are well above $10,000. I think that the sophistication of the Chiles, Argentinas, of Brazil cannot be compared to the situation of the Central American countries. I think that in South America, in many cases, you are going to be very close to the frontier, basically, of innovation, and basically there you will have to innovate. You will have to be able to introduce new products. I think that in many of the other countries where you are well within the frontier, basically what you have is know-how, how you are going to do better what you are doing, how you are going to be more efficient, and you are not going to be competing with new products. You are going to be competing, being more efficient and benefiting from the lower wages. But I think that we have to make the difference, because different countries are going to be in a different part.
Yeah. Okay. Before I move on to Professor Ferraz, I'd just like to give you some advance warning that after the Professor's remarks, I'm going to come out to the audience for questions. I know it's been a long day listening, so I'd sort of like to give you more time to be able to talk to us and ask some questions instead of just doing the listening. So please do think up 1 or 2 questions so that we don't have a big silence when I come out to the audience. Help me get through the end of the day successfully. So please come up with some questions. Professor Ferraz, so based upon your, the research that you've been involved with at the University of Rio de Janeiro, what are the big factors for you for manufacturing in Latin America?
Well, Simon, I want to pick the minister and then Humberto's 2 or 3 comments. And, and now the first one is, and I think that we should take what the minister has said about, and it will be related to the issues of technology, new technologies coming up, and the issue of vision and having a direction similar to our hosts have demonstrated here. So this is, the importance of having a vision and a long-term direction and being tenacious in terms of following a certain route, I think in the very end is important. But in order to have that, in this moment, I think that especially in the case of Brazil, in relation to these new technologies and the new world that has been announced and praised in this conference, there is a issue of awareness. I think that a minority of our people, our corporations, our government, the civil society realizes what is coming up. And when you take what Humberto was saying, it is very true. Latin America and Brazil, being the large country and so on, is a sort of a case. Our region is diverse, and diversity should be praised and valued. But our region is also heterogeneous. There is a lot of inequalities there. And I'm not talking only about the social inequalities, which is well known, but especially on the capacity of corporations to compete. And so we find corporations on levels of competences at, different levels. We have very advanced ones, and we have some Brazilian startups showing off their AI developments here. But we also have very backward companies. At this moment, so this heterogeneity is very, it stops a process of inclusive and sustainable growth. And to a large extent, I would just put one more issue that Humberto was saying, is that to a large extent, these inequalities is explained by the size of our market and the levels of income of our market. So relatively to a very homogeneous country and high level like Japan, where the demand, the clients, whatever the type of that they are press for the corporations to have a certain behavior, there is a latitude in our societies that they accept products and behaviors by companies of every type. And this can be not very inducive to a sustainable progress, especially in the introduction of new technologies.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you to, your perspective in relation to the private sector?
Yes.
So we have, Latin America does have a lot of inequalities in different dimensions, so social income or others. So if you were a manufacturing firm, what does that mean for how you do business, either how you make your products or who you sell them to?
It's how you make a product, how you relate to your suppliers, and how you relate to your customers. Yes, so depending So it depending on the market segment that you are aiming at, you may have to introduce production processes and design of products of a certain type. So suppose that your clientele is very demanding, then you have to use whatever best technologies are. But then the whole system, the whole ecosystem of production may not contribute to the supply of goods, to the supply of skills, to the logistics that Humberto was saying. But then, on the other hand, you may fall on reality imposes itself, and you allow yourself to have a latitude, and then, start producing not only of the low latitude or high quality, but also to clients that would accept anything. So, and then your process, your skills, and so on, become not as sharp as it should be.
Okay, yeah. I'm now going to sort of come out to the audience and see if there's anyone who would like to direct our discussion for the last sort of 15 or 20 minutes that we have today. One question down here in the front left.
Hello, my name is Dausha. It's a question to Professor Ferraz. In Brazil, as I know, we have very high advanced companies like Embraer, is an aircraft manufacturer. On the other side, we know that we are a big extractor of coffee beans, but the biggest exporter is Germany, who has not only one bean being planted. So my question is, what could be a governmental policy in order that we enhance more Embraers in Brazil?
Minister, like this is your... Listen, I think we have a recent experience in policy making and implementing in Brazil that I think that is shift from the traditional way, and I think that is something there. And basically, and this is not an innovation, a Brazilian innovation, but something that was, inspired by the other countries. So instead of pushing, this policy was pulling. So basically, and it was a policy oriented for innovation. Basically, the government, what they did was to identify challenges. So a challenge, for example, in the ethanol, was that the ethanol, with the extending technology, there would be no way that productivity could be increased because there was limits to the production process. But then if it was a biotech, a second generation ethanol production, then there would be a quantum leap on production, on productivity. So the challenge was productivity on that sector. So there was a call for projects, for innovation plans, not projects, for innovation plans, open. The companies that were interested submitted projects, and then the government could evaluate, and the companies were competing for the best solutions. So we did this. At that time, I was on the other side. I was on her side. When we did this for different areas and different challenges, then it was possible, even during a period of 2015 that was a crisis in Brazil, the demand for the specific projects was very high. Now, for doing that, it was necessary to engage into a deep knowledge of what a challenge is, if there is capabilities on the firms, if there is a potential market. Otherwise, you just be proposing something that would not have a demand. And it worked. But again, I will go back to what the minister was saying. There was a vision. We have to challenge, identifying the challenges and make a call and pull rather than pushing solutions for the private sector.
Okay. Perhaps, Minister, if we can come to you on this. what do you think are the pull factors? What are the things happening today that you see as opportunities maybe for El Salvador to pull some industry in?
Primero quisiera decir que, al igual que es mi primera vez acá en los Emiratos, y lo primero que aprendí es que hay 7 Emiratos, pero cada uno tiene sus propias características. Es lo mismo en Latinoamérica, y no necesariamente podemos ver con el mismo cristal las distintas realidades. Yo creo que es importante, nadie tiene una receta específica para solventar los problemas, volviendo a la pregunta y después retomo un poco lo que usted me pregunta. Pero yo sí creo que como los hacedores de política, los gobernantes, nos toca trabajar desde nuestra perspectiva en al menos 5 áreas. Una tiene que ver con los marcos normativos y regulatorios que garanticen que esas condiciones que hoy por hoy son un obstáculo, una desventaja al transporte, a la movilidad, al comercio, se conviertan en una ventaja competitiva en nuestras regiones, que creemos los marcos regulatorios que faciliten esas acciones. Creo que es importante también garantizar la inversión en el mejoramiento de las competencias de nuestros recursos humanos. Esta mañana tuvimos una excelente panel en relación a esto, prepararnos, anticiparnos hacia lo nuevo. Estamos hablando de robótica, estamos hablando de inteligencia artificial y tenemos que preparar a nuestro personal, a nuestro recurso humano para esa realidad. Creo que es importante también crear mecanismos de fondeo hacia nuestras compañías, porque aquí, al igual que la realidad de muchos países, en Latinoamérica tenemos un gran peso de la pequeña y mediana empresa. Para poder crear los encadenamientos perfectos es importante crear condiciones para que este tipo de compañías, este tamaño de compañías se integren en las grandes cadenas y logre incorporar toda esta era de la digitalización a sus procesos y lo haga una ventaja competitiva. Y creo además que es importante trabajar en infraestructura que permita dar los saltos importantes para la innovación, para la incorporación de los procesos tecnológicos, infraestructura que desde mi punto de vista es una competencia que el Estado debe facilitar para crear esas condiciones. Entonces creo yo que son esos factores los que van a permitir realmente poder crear unas nuevas condiciones para los países latinoamericanos y poder aprovechar esas ventajas que siempre sigue teniendo el gran mercado mundial.
But I think, Simon, if I can, there is one source of advantage in Latin America that I think that we undervalued. And basically, the adaptability of our people, the capacity to adapt, the capacity to be flexible, the capacity to adjust to new situations given our history that is not very bright, but out of the hardships that our populations have gone through, I think that there are some values there that should be, put more into the limelight. And the capacity to adapt, especially to this new world, when we go to more rigid, very established societies, where the rules are established, that is very difficult to change, and the Minister the Minister of Transport was saying, how difficult it is to change the tube in the UK. So given this need to adapt, I think there is a window of opportunity for us on this sense.
Humberto, could I bring you in actually on this issue about technology and change? I mean, you have a very cross-regional perspective. These trends like artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, how do you think that will play out for Latin America? You could say it's going to be very risky because relatively high wage location, so they're ripe for technology to come in and reduce costs by removing jobs.
let me think of a positive example that probably is easier to deal with, which is the case of Costa Rica. Because this is a country where we have seen that there was a dramatic change. So this is a country that 20 years ago, it was mainly agriculture, and today is manufacturing value added. And manufacturing is not only just moving to cheap manufacturing based on low wages, but they are going to high value added manufacturing. And what you have is the story of a couple of cases. You have two nice stories. One is Intel that came and then went, but Intel came, and it was not a policy that sometimes we think by design or something like that. It was the president of the country of Costa Rica that went to Intel, sit in the door of Intel and say, I'm not moving until I can meet the CEO, and I'm going to convince this person that they have to come to Costa Rica to have the plant. And it was like that. It was just driven by the will of a government that was insisting on bringing that. They were offering a quite stable social environment. Costa Rica is the Switzerland of Latin America, if you want. They have relatively high levels of education. They were putting that on the line. But what it was obvious, I think, at that stage was the commitment of a government, not only to bring a company, but also to take care of the company when they are there. Now, the story was not brilliant in the sense that you bring these companies and what you are expecting is to have spillovers. That is not only the company, but also the know-how of the folks that are working there go somewhere else. And I think that it was not a positive example in the sense that there were almost no spillovers. But then you have a second generation of import of companies like Abbott Laboratories. And that was really fantastic because the fascinating thing is that the level of Costa Rica probably was not to make microchips or to make robotics or to make anything like that. But they were very well placed to manufacture the little tubes that you are using in the lines that when you are in the hospital, when they are for the drips, that is just plastic. That is a piece of plastic. But how you have to manufacture that, the quality control that you have there is impressive. And the value added for this piece of plastic is really fantastic. And the guys are doing very well there. So it's not a question always of looking to these very high-tech things. Sometimes there are simple things that you can do where the only thing that you have to offer is a guarantee that you are doing that according to some specifications that are going to be important. And it's not very difficult doing that. I think that many times we forget that stage. And just one final reflection. In 1968, Texas Instruments had a factory in a country of Latin America, and it was El Salvador. And I think it's impressive to see a picture of a photograph of a cheap Texas Instrument made in El Salvador. The company left, I think, went to Singapore when the civil war in El Salvador started. But I think that going back to what we were saying before, that we have to be also somewhat optimistic. 50 years ago, we have companies with high tech coming to many of the countries of Latin America. I think that if we were there 50 years ago, we could go there because I think that the quality and the ability, the closeness to the United States is still there.
Okay. We come back to the audience and see if anybody would like to close us off for the day with a question. Yep, one over on this other side. This is the microphone coming over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mari Glera. I'm the CEO from TestBack in Finland. Latin America is one of the most blessed continents, if you may. But one of the biggest things that it doesn't help in order to develop, I believe, is corruption. And I would like to ask the panelists, please, what is it that you guys are doing, I believe we should do in order to even improve a little bit more? Because that's one of the things that stops big corporations into coming to certain countries.
Can I go on this? Because Brazil is in the limelight of this. The first is Finnish companies have been in Brazil for some time. And my record, I don't think that we have seen Finnish companies leaving Brazil. The largest Swedish industrial city in the world is the São Paulo metropolitan area. Nordic countries have a good experience in Brazil in doing business and making money. So, one thing is the country, the other thing are people, a minority of people that use the latitude existing in our institutions to wrongdoing. My country, 25 years ago, did the impeachment of a president because of corruption. By then, we thought that given that we were impeaching a president for this reason, that this would trickle down and a new era would start. We have seen in the past 2-3 years that the disease was not eradicated, and that it's revealing itself in a much higher scale that nobody really believed that. So every day you open it again. The worst. Sorry, a parenthesis here. The worst is that there was an individual called João Carlos de Medeiros Ferraz. And people call him João Carlos Ferraz, and he was arrested for wrongdoing. And one of the presses show in 2 weeks ago on the major television channel, the scheme, the hierarchy of a scheme of the organogram of corruption, and they put my picture on this. Imagine, this is. So, we are going through, and what is going on in Brazil is also going on in other countries, but also going on somewhere else. Yes, that is an Asian country where the president was impeached recently. Yeah. So the issue of corruption is not made in Latin America. Yeah. Now, we are going through this cleansing process, a purgatory. But what we have seen so far is that the institutions are working, the law is working, politicians are in prison, major businessmen are in prison. So this gives a hope that there are changes going on. Yeah? So this is, okay, we have to go through this process, we go through this process. It will take time, it will take time. We are young and naive in 25 years ago, when you thought that just by example. It seems that it has to go through this process much longer. So this is good, and it's going on, and it will change behavior, and we will extend the horizon of predictability, and will be good for business if they behave well. If it will be good for business, and it will induce better practices. Some of the corporations, the wrongdoing, you find them not only in countries that have been impeached, but corporations that are well known also have gone through problems. International companies have gone through process of that nature as well. So what is the problem of this? Is that when elections come, the political parties have been so affected that if they ask me today, who am I going to vote? I said, who is going to offer me a platform that I can believe? Yeah? Who is going to offer me a platform of hope? And so this is the problem, that the next problem is going to be the rebuilding of the political system, rebuilding of business practices, and then make people believe that this is going to be something different. And then they start to do the project, the vision that we need for the long term. Yeah? So it's there, But the country will be there. These people will pass, the country will be there, and I think it will be much better than what we have today. And it's not only the case of Brazil, yes? I think it's spread out. And it's not only in Latin America, as I said.
We're down to our last 3 minutes, so I'll give a final call for any questions. Last question of day 2. Microphone just coming down.
Hi, thank you. Diego Calix from PwC. So I like one of the points you, Professor, on the lack of awareness in Central or Latin American countries, and because I believe that there is opportunity. There are people that have the right mindset. They go abroad, they get the skills, and they come back and they bring technologies or ideas. But then, for example, in El Salvador, I'm from El Salvador myself, and I've seen startups that they bring an idea such as like the Uber ride-sharing model, and they say, hey, this worked somewhere else, we can bring it here, commercialize, and that's it. But there's no such mentality where you think about possibilities of an interconnected organization, enabling your people, training your people, investing in your people, how your operations, marketing, finance can all work together. So how does the government kind of bring that awareness and help these kind of startups that have the right, you know, they get going with the right foot so they can, you know, get support from the government and, you know, and just be kind of a success story for the rest?
So we'll ask the Vice Minister to come back to you, but before we do, what's your answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it's definitely a matter of they got to understand that a digital or using data, it really makes a difference. I don't think that there's any focus on customer-centric, customer-centered organization. You see all these apps and they start working, but with very poor user interfaces. They don't know that information is all around and it's accessible to every one of us. And as well as the point that the rest of the people, you know, you mentioned that no one knows what's coming.
We
Okay.
need you in El Salvador.
So one answer, so you have to move back. And,
yeah, go ahead.
And then, Vice Minister, what's your comments?
Bueno, yo quizás tratando de responder, pero haciendo una reflexión al mismo tiempo. Yo creo que hemos estado durante estos 2 días hablando mucho sobre la industrialización y las nuevas tendencias que de la nueva industria digital nos pone. Pero yo creo que aquí hay 2 reflexiones que me gustaría hacer. Creo que tenemos que cambiar el modelo en que nos interrelacionamos como países. Y aquí a lo que me refiero es tratar de tener un modelo más cooperativo, de acuerdo a estas realidades. Hay algo que yo creo que no debemos olvidar en toda esta cumbre, y es que uno de los aspectos importantes que la industria debe garantizar es la seguridad alimentaria de nuestros países. Y hasta el momento no he visto una discusión donde hable cómo las nuevas industrias van a beneficiar y van a asegurar la seguridad alimentaria de nuestros pueblos. Entonces yo creo que ahí hay una enorme oportunidad para un modelo colaborativo de países o de compañías que están a la vanguardia con procesos de simulación y cómo estas nuevas tecnologías se pueden aplicar en países de Latinoamérica, en donde todavía somos los proveedores del oxígeno del mundo. ¿Cómo vamos a garantizar que el agua no se extinga y que la humanidad pueda sobrevivir? Creo yo que aquí hay una enorme oportunidad de vincular a la industria en un nuevo modelo, pero que garantice específicamente estas realidades. Quiero decir que estuve hace 2 días en Etihad Tower y me tomé un refresco Y para mi sorpresa, las flores que tenía el refresco son flores que se cultivan en Centroamérica. Creo yo que todavía un modelo cooperativo en donde países como los Emiratos, como algunas de las compañías que hemos tenido esta mañana y que nos han mostrado sus avances tecnológicos, puedan lograr vincular a las nuevas generaciones de Latinoamérica para poder aprovechar estas oportunidades y desarrollar esas nuevas destrezas que nuestra juventud posiblemente estará con facilidades de poder aprender. Creo que por ahí hay una reflexión importante que pues quizás de alguna manera responda la inquietud que planteaba.
Okay, so we have run out of time now, but I think it's an interesting note to finish. A challenge from the private sector to the public sector, and then a challenge back from governments to private sector and society. So hopefully more cooperation to come. But thank you very much for participating so well in the discussion. Thank you to my panelists, Vice Minister Merlin Barrera Lopez, Professor João Ferraz, and Humberto Lopez from the World Bank. Please join me in thanking them.